This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed! Da-da-da-da-da! It's Benefits Buzz! I'm your host, Eric Pilla, and I'm joined, as always, by Hayden Goethe.
Eric, what are we doing here?
I don't know, but it's on season 5 and I still haven't nailed the jingle yet. That one didn't work, did it?
No.
You can be honest with me, man.
I mean, we still got a few more of these to go.
That's true. Hopefully we have a couple more seasons we can get into it.
Yes, definitely.
Well, for those of you tuning in to the YouTube version of this, you'll see we've got a kick butt set here. We've got an awesome guest, and we'll get to that in just a moment. We are live in Hollywood, Florida. It's not Hollywood, California, but we still have a star that's going to be on the podcast. We are here at our WEX Spark event. It's one of the leading industry events in the benefit space. And so we thought, when we have all these great guests, let's bring them on the podcast.
And actually do full in-person podcasts.
This is weird for us.
When was the last time we did one of these?
I know. I'm used to staring into the camera, but now I have got our guests, and I want to introduce our guests. We have, and I'm a little nervous. I always get nervous. We have our Chief Human Resources Officer, Melanie Tinto, on the show.
Hello.
Melanie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Excited to be in sunny Florida.
I know. This is great to do this in person. Yeah.
I know. This is awesome. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about the topic that we have to talk about today, and that is people analytics in HR. One of the themes that we've talked about all season is, well, what a struggle it is right now for HR professionals, just with this great resignation and keeping talent, and everyone's exploring every different way to figure out how do we keep our employees happy, how do we retain them, how do we make sure we're taking care of them, right, and providing a great place. And so one of the things when we were doing our research and we wanted to think about great topics for this podcast for HR professional listeners is people analytics, and we were like, that's a thing in HR. And so we wanted to talk about how do we keep our employees happy? How do we focus on the well-being of them? And this seems like a really cool thing. So we're excited to have you on the show to talk about it. And so let's begin this conversation with, for people like us who are like, can you just define what are people analytics and how does that fit in the HR space?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And if you think about people analytics, it's really about just collecting and analyzing talent data. So when you think about the ways in which sales or marketing or other areas of the company analyze and collect data on their customers, we're analyzing and collecting data on our talent. And so when you think about the HR function, it's really an opportunity to have a much more evidence-based approach to how we do our work. Awesome.
And yeah, I mean, when you look at what types of issues, I guess, are you hoping to kind of address when you're looking at people analytics and this kind of data?
There's a ton of different ways in which we look at this data. So if you're looking at the foundational areas of data and analytics, you're looking at turnover data, retention, cost to hire, the basics. When you look at the more mature functions, you're looking at compensation, you're looking at succession planning, talent analytics for your board or for your employee environmental sustainability and governance reports. So anything that helps you provide a story not only internally, but also externally as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love that. Sometimes, and this is going to sound horrible, but sometimes like human resources, like everything is kind of a feeling or a gut reaction. And I love that. Just like any other industry, any other practice, data is most important. Instead of making these assumptions and these guesses, it's great to hear that we're doing that. And again, this is a news flash for me. You talk
really just the ability to just make informed decisions,
well,
right?
I know, that makes sense.
There's just so much out there, and we all see this in all sorts of different types of work. So
yeah, big data
why
is
wouldn't
everywhere.
it be in HR?
Yeah,
right?
of course, big data is everywhere. Talk about employee experience a little bit. Can you kind of drill into how does people analytics improve the employee experience at an organization?
Yeah, so we just did, as you know, our employee survey at WEX. And so all of our employees have the opportunity to participate in the employee survey. And what I love about it is it gives us a lot more information relative to what employees are thinking, what's top of mind for them, how do we build our culture at the organization. And so when you look at the kind of rich data we get back, that gives us the sentiment of the employees. It also helps us understand their intent to stay, how are they feeling about the company. And then they also have the opportunity too for us to really look at the different types of information they have from their write-in. So they have an opportunity, as you know, to have comments in the survey, and that gives us really rich data to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the employees, whether it's compensation, benefits, the way in which we think about career paths. There's such rich data in there. The other piece that we look at too is, okay, so what are we going to do about it? So
Right.
you gave us your voice. How are we going to actually bring that to life? And so we think about what's the action planning that we're going to do. And then the way in which we measure that is through, again, data.
Yeah.
We take and we look at pulse surveys. So how do we actually think about what they're telling us? Did we do the right mechanisms, the right measures to actually make a marked change? And so we use data and surveys to actually ask the employees, did we do what you actually want?
Right.
And did we hit the mark? And
Yeah.
so there's lots of opportunities for us to think differently about just the survey data and then give much more rich experiences to our employees as well through that data.
Sure. Okay, so I'll have to ask you, I've gotten the surveys, and I've always wondered, because you talked about data's only as good as what comes in, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And so I've wondered, are people honest? Do they, sometimes I'm like, is that going to be tied to me? Can I truly be candid in this response? So I'd love to hear a little bit about do employees feel safe? Is this information tied to an employee? Is it aggregated across a team? How is that data used? If I can ask that question to you, Mel.
You sure can.
Yeah.
So if you think about employee survey data in particular, we're looking at it where only certain sample sizes. So if you're a manager and you only have if you have a very small team, we wouldn't actually count that. So we can't give you data if you are able to identify who that individual is. So it's very confidential. We expect all of the employees to be able to preserve that anonymity. And so all of your responses are aggregated together. Your open-ended comments that you actually responded to are shown verbatim, but we can't tie it to a particular person. So anything we look at is in totality. It's not for an individual. And again, even for managers, it's only if they have a larger team where you could preserve the anonymity. So you can rest assured your data is safe with us. And then for most of the turnover or dashboards, we're doing the same thing. It's all collected on an aggregate basis. We're also very rigorous in terms of who gets to see that data. So there's a data sharing policy, and we make sure, and I think all companies really do that as well, or should be doing that, to make sure that they're preserving the employee data. That's of utmost importance, particularly if you're around the globe. There's even stricter requirements outside of the U.S. as well.
Well, and I assume that was the case. I think it's just good, because I think for everyone listening, even if you feel like that way, it's always probably good to communicate to your employees that as a reminder, right, this information is you're anonymous in your responses. We'll use it in aggregate to make the company a better place.
And that's a great point, making sure you're telling employees that it is based on an anonymous, and also having employees be able to feel comfortable to ask that question as well. How will my data be used, so that they can trust the process?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked so much too just about the importance of supporting employees today and how much that's really changed in the last couple of years. You know, if you could maybe pull back a little bit and just kind of, because I think that when we're talking through this topic, I could see how people might think that this is really a response to the Great Resignation. And, can you kind of maybe give us a little bit of the evolution story of data and analytics? Is this something that's really new as a response to everything that we've seen in terms of employee turnover, or has this been going on for a long time and it's really just more of an evolution thing?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces to that. So there's the Great Resignation, I call it the Great Reflection. So how are people thinking differently about where they work, what they work on, how they want to demonstrate and develop their career? And so there's lots of different ways we use that, those insights to think about the employee at the center. From a data perspective, if you think back to how, whether it's, again, sales or marketing or others, you have customer retention data, right? So think very similarly to how do we look at our customers and our retention, our net promoter scores? We're doing the same thing in HR. Right? The biggest line item that we have in many companies is the cost of our talent, not only to retain the talent, but also to acquire the talent. And so how do we actually have, a better understanding of what our employees want, the right culture that they need to actually retain them, and then how do we actually have a winning strategy in the marketplace to grow through new employees? So very similar to sales. And so we use that data in a way in which we can make sure that we're doing the right things for our employees, and it's proving out. If you look at our data from a Great Resignation perspective, we actually have continued to trend very similarly to our 2019 levels. We've been very fortunate. Yeah. And I think that differentiator is really our culture and the fact that we're constantly thinking about, we don't say we made it, we're saying what more can we do for our employees, just like you do for your customers, and just like we'll do this week with our partners here at the conference.
Yeah, this is great. And thanks I feel like we're employees. Yeah. I'm kind of getting to see behind the curtain to see oh, that's why they're asking these questions, right? So this is fun. Thanks for being
so candid. It's all about you, Eric.
Right? Sure. Sure. We'll go with that.
Hayden too.
We're getting a level of transparency here.
We are.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I love about this podcast. So, so we have people analytics, and then I'm going to use air quotes here, but we have traditional methods of measuring engagement and stuff. How do you marry the two or juxtapose like this people analytics with some of more traditional HR practices, maybe before people analytics came along?
So it's funny. I'll answer it in a couple of different
Sure.
ways. So there's always been the foundational elements like recruitment, compensation, employee relations, learning and leadership development, right? And I think this will resonate for some of your audience. If you think back to HR of the past, right? You had people always saying, how do I get a seat at the table, right? And so when I worked in Silicon Valley with the CHRO of HP, Tracy Keogh, she would always get so frustrated. And she'd say, what do you mean seat at the table? We are the table. And so if you think about what she was trying to say there, it was really about, we have the business strategy, and then the most critical element to achieving that strategy is the talent.
Sure.
And so, in the past, you had more of that gut feel from an HR perspective, right? We think we're doing the right things. And now with the data and analytics we actually can make much more pointed decisions, recommendations, and actions that are going to serve the employees in a much better way, whether that's through benefits or whether that's through the learning and leadership development that we offer. So it's just a much different way of looking at data and a more evidence-based, but also it means you don't have to do all things for everybody.
True.
You can be much more targeted. And for, whether you're a Fortune 1 company or whether you're a small company, you only have so much money to spend.
Right.
And so how do you actually spend that money in a meaningful way that's going to resonate for employees is really what we're trying to do is best investment, just like you would do in your business, best investment for the talent as well.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about like the scale of something like that, or if you have any thoughts, and especially for our audience, we're sure we have HR professionals listening from really small companies. We might have HR professionals listening from Fortune 1000 companies. Like, talk a little bit about like how you could maybe provide some advice, whether no matter where you are on that range, in terms of how you could really implement something like this if you're a really small HR team or you're like Google.
Right.
Yeah, so if you're a Google or some of the other Silicon Valley companies, you might have very large data teams, right? You have the opportunity to have much more employees and resources that you have against this particular topic. If you look at a WEX or even companies that are much smaller, you're probably just starting out, and so you're double hatting people, right? So you have to look at people on your team that have an aptitude naturally for data and analytics. One way I did this 4.5 years ago when I started, we had a small but mighty team at WEX. We've grown quite a bit over time, but I don't be afraid to reach across the aisle and ask other people for help. So I actually asked our strategy team to partner with me because they know data, they know analytics, and they help build my initial dashboard. So think creatively in terms of who has the expertise that I need if you're a small company, and then what else can I build? The other piece, there's tons of free resources for folks that are just starting out on this journey. And so there's tons on the internet. There's lots of dashboards that HR professionals can review and look at and say, what's going to work best for me?
Right.
And then how do I build a dashboard that's going to be meaningful for the execs that I partner with? And that's really what you're trying to drive. Again, think about, I have business challenges I'm trying to solve. How do I use the talent to actually achieve the goals of the company and accelerate the growth of the company?
Right.
So HR really does play a pivotal role in that. And I'm excited that HR is continuing to move to the forefront through this data and evidence.
Solid advice. I think that's really smart to look at the resources around you who can help.
Exactly.
Obviously, it's important for the entire organization to do it. I think I've figured out, right? People analytics. I've got that figured out. But what I'd love to do for our listeners is, can you help make it tangible? Is there a scenario of where you've seen people analytics like work or come to life, or you've learned something and we've been able to create a scenario where we were able to change and impact the company? Anything like bubble up?
So there's lots.
Okay.
But, let me think about one. So if we're looking at turnover, so we talked about the Great Resignation. Yes. One of the areas that we recently focused on was turnover. And so if you think about turnover could mean involuntary and voluntary turnover. Right. For those HR professionals, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's different levels of data as well. So there's data by tenure, there's data by different demographics. We actually looked at our turnover with less than 1 year of experience, 1 year of service with WEX. Okay. And so part of what we found in there is that there was more turnover, higher turnover there than there were in the rest of the organization. We took one step deeper and realized not only was it turnover less than 1 year, but it was employees that were working full-time remote. And so, you know, you continue to peel back the onion and say, what problem are we actually trying to solve? What we've ended up doing now is looking at our onboarding process. So how do we bring employees into the organization? How do we think about the tools and resources, the culture that we're trying to bring to life in a remote environment? And so it's really had us rethink our way in which we onboard new employees. The benefit to this is that we'll be able to look at our past data set and say, okay, what was the turnover with the old program? And then is implementing this new program, have we made a marked improvement? Are we able to retain the talent that we want? We work so hard to get the talent. We don't want them walking out the door. And so this is a huge opportunity for us to make sure that the investment that the business is making in talent, we're helping them to not only accelerate their readiness to WEX, but also retain them for the long term as well.
That's so interesting. I mean, like, it's the data is not just helping you like develop solutions, but it's also really helping you uncover challenges, you know, when you really think about it. You know, you talked a little bit about talent bias, you know, could you expand on that a little bit more, like the ability of data and this level of analytics really removing any sort of bias in terms of employee challenges, employee talent, things like that?
Yeah, and there's lots of different articles and information relative to bias, right? There's many different tools out there now, and it's a hot topic these days in HR. One of the places that we're looking at is our VP promotion process. So if you, historically, let's pretend you have an employee and you want to promote them, and you'll just decide, oh, employee A, I'm going to promote, right? And you as a manager had that latitude in the past. The way at WEX that we've made that a much more evidence-based process is not only do you have to have your job analyzed to make sure it's a VP, but we also have to make sure the employee is ready. So it's not just what you do, but how you do it from a leadership behaviors perspective. So we have a series of interviews that an individual goes through. We also have assessments that we've added. And so we use a Hogan personality assessment to actually assess the employee for their abilities and capabilities. We're able to give the employee information and feedback relative to their performance, how they can actually grow and develop at the company, where their watch out items are in terms of stress. And so not only are we using that to promote people, but from an unbiased perspective, we're also able to build a much broader, cast a much broader net relative to who are future VPs at WEX. And so how do we actually build talent of the future in a much more meaningful and rich way versus, again, I know Eric or I know you, I'm able to speak to you, but I might not know 10 other people that are just as phenomenal. And so that's the opportunity that we have.
Nice. Well, I'll be waiting for my Hogan survey any time now.
Call me up, we'll do it anytime.
Can we talk through the results on a podcast episode?
No, I agree. I just kid. So we've gone through the process a little bit, and you've had some experience implementing it. And so what I love to do whenever I can for our listeners is there anything now that we've kind of gone through the process of leveraging people analytics, looking back, right, hindsight 2020, going like, oh, if I would have known that, I might have either not done that or done that better or done that differently. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I think my kids call that a do-over.
Yeah, there you go. It is, yeah.
So when I think about it, part of it is making sure that your data and the way in which you collect the data is accurate, right? Yeah. So how do you think not only near term, what are the foundational elements? So especially, again, for those that are first time setting this up, what's the data I want to collect near term, but also having a data roadmap in terms of what I want to collect in the future. Sure. The other is you're only as good as the data you get, right? We see this in sales all the time, garbage in, garbage out, right? So you want to make sure your data is as accurate as possible. One way a lot of companies do that is through an HR information system. And again, if you're smaller, you might not have that. So, do you have an Excel spreadsheet, but what are the fields? What is the commonality or the consistency with how you code the data? And then how do you make sure you have definitions for the way in which you're measuring things, right? So someone else can follow what you're trying to do. Yeah. But that's probably, if I look back, we had to do a lot of data cleanup because we didn't start from scratch in the way in which we wanted to end up in the future. Right.
And I think for a lot of HR people, it's putting that data hat on. Yes. And that's why it's good to consult with other people in your company that might have those skill sets who necessarily aren't into.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like a left brain, right brain thing.
For sure.
Some of us are more inclined to data, some of us are more creative, and just
absolutely.
Identifying those people.
And the other caution too, it's a good caution for HR people, but the other caution is the more you use data, the more pull you get from the business because they understand that it's evidence-based, it's not an emotional decision.
Right.
And so we've grown tremendously from an HR function perspective because we've been able to prove our value through the data and resources that we provide. And so it's a huge benefit to HR. So I would say think about not only where you want to start foundationally, but where also you want to mature your function because it will happen very quickly.
Oh, and I'm sure HR pros love to hear that. So everyone, yeah, I love it. That's great advice. That's great advice.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a ton of ground here, Melanie. I mean, this has been amazing. You know, just getting, again, this level of transparency and like talking through something that I think, you know, those most employees just probably aren't aware of behind the scenes, just as like you would see that in other areas too. I mean, thinking about everything we've covered today, is there anything we've missed? Any final takeaways you'd have for our audience you'd like to touch on?
So I think, I don't know, if I look ahead to the future, I think it's excitement, right? So from an HR professional's perspective, now more than ever, you have a huge opportunity to move the needle with your talent, with your business. And again, think about the fact that you own one of the largest line items for a company, right? From an expense perspective, you have an opportunity to make a positive impact on your shareholders, on your employee experience, and on your customers. And so take the advantage and run with it. Just run with it and have fun with it. And the last piece I would say is, you know, after this couple of years with COVID, make sure as HR professionals, you're taking a little bit of time for yourself, have some fun, because COVID was long. HR did an amazing job around the world of making sure employees were safe and making sure they had the right policies in place to support them. Just make sure you're also taking time for yourself. And that's, you know, you'll just be able to have a springboard into the future.
Yeah, that's such good advice. And that's something we've been trying to hammer home is like, not only have they had to take care of themselves, right, but they have to take care of their employees too. And it's definitely taxing. And so I try to give all of our HR people a hug every time I see them. And thank you for everything that you do. This has been so good, Melanie. Thank you so much. This was so fun to do it in person.
This is
Yes,
great.
this was
Yes.
amazing.
This is awesome.
Yeah, and thanks again for sharing, again, pulling the curtain for some of the great things that we're doing here at WEX that I know that other HR pros would love to hear about. So we really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks to both of
Will
you
you
as
come
well.
on next season?
Absolutely.
All right, you heard it first.
Yeah, we got another one.
We've got it out. We've got it on camera.
Next time outside with sunglasses. We'll have to try that.
Deal.
right.
Deal. Thank you, Melanie.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.